Years ago, when I was still a dean here, I used to go around the country and talk to alumni groups. And I would do an update on developments on campus, and I promise you, I never, ever, ever mentioned the Stanford band. However, yes, there's always a but. As soon as it was time for questions, if not the first, I would say probably then the second question was always about the band. And every question began with one word: why? Why do they do what they do? Exactly. My favorite was, why doesn't the university do something? And then sort of the crowner was, why can't they just march like a normal band? And
because we can.
Hey, that wasn't my question, that was theirs. And so for every time this question came up, I always gave the same three-word answer, which seemed to me was all that needed to be said. And I would simply say, it's the band. So indeed, it is the band that has all of us here this afternoon. And so it's time to get to our program. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's program, John Mannion. John is a member of the... You'll have plenty of time. John's a member of the class of 1989, majored in communication, was obviously a member of the band and was the band manager. He is presently a partner and executive vice president of Doremus & Company, a world-leading business-to-business advertising and marketing agency with offices all over the place, although John lives with his wife and two young daughters, each of whom plays an instrument in the Bay Area. I think most impressive of all is that John is living proof that even band members graduate and go on to lead productive lives. So, John.
Norm! That was Norm! Thank you, Norm. And what do we think of Norm? Nice job. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to what is indeed going to go down as an historical society event, one that will probably not be repeated for another 50 years, in which other people will be here. Want to thank a few people before we get started. First, of course, Howard Wolf, first Norm, but also Howard Wolf, who's Vice President of Alumni Relations and President of the Alumni Association, who helped us quite a bit put this together. Chris Griffith, who is Associate Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Student Life, and present Mother Hen for the Stanford Band. Let's see, who else is here? Let's see, Hal gave me a long list. And is John Hennessy here? Darn, really, I really thought he would make it. Is John Etchemendy here? Double darn. All right, well then we can have fun. Yes, and we also want to thank, well, let's see, we'll hope that they keep up the good work. Scott and Kevin, our Dinkelspiel AV guys, for keeping things going. So thank you in advance, Scott and Kevin. A little housekeeping, turn off your vibrating sound-making machines for the time being. Our equipment is very rudimentary and would not be affected by it in any way. But who do you want to talk to other than us right now? You'll also notice there might have been, coming into this, there are cards. And despite our traditions, the Stanford Historical Society typically puts questions in the question and answer session at the end on cards, which are collected. So some of you may have those. About halfway through the program, people will be coming up and down collecting those from you. So keep those in mind as we make our way through the loosely chronological panel that we have assembled. I'll introduce them as they show up. You see them in all their glory right here, but I'll make my way down that line. I was, yes, class of '89. I was manager in '88. I had the distinct privilege of being in the Rolling Stone article in 1987 about the Stanford Band, where Rolling Stone referred to me as a ruddy, heavy-set New Yorker. What an ego boost for a 19-year-old. Well, you can see nothing's changed. And so 26 years later, here I am. I also emceed Art Barnes's retirement party and was, for some reason, asked to come back here again. I was also, back in '88, manager during the 25th reunion. So I have extensive background in telling you all to sit down and shut up, at least half of you. The other half of you will get to know that over the next hour and a half or so. So first questions. If you're not aware, this is a historical society event, not a band reunion event. Are there folks in the room who actually were not in the Stanford Band or associated with the Stanford Band? Welcome. Thank you very much. These folks put up with all kinds of other groups who take over their events, and today is no exception. We are certainly taking over their event. I want to thank you for having us. Who here wished they were in the Stanford Band? Okay, good. Who here absolutely hates the Stanford Band? All right, thank you. Good, good. Who spent all 4 undergrad years in the Stanford Band? Good. Who joined Stanford Band as a grad student? Any grad students here? Who here had carnal relations with a person who's now your spouse while you were in the Stanford Band? Who here had carnal relations with a person in the Stanford Band who is now your spouse and produced offspring who are in the Stanford Band? Who here has been introduced by work colleagues or friends as somebody who was in the Stanford Band? Who here has used the Stanford Band to their advantage in a business dinner or cocktail conversation? Who here has said in influential gatherings, oh yeah, I know Gary Terrell, the trombone guy? Who here has lied about not being in the Stanford Band to their business or professional advantage? Who here has had the Stanford Band emblazoned on their car license plates in one form or another? Who here has had intimate relations with a dolly? While in band? After band? Good. Who here has had intimate relations with a tree? Who came to Stanford not knowing how to play an instrument but still joined the Stanford Band anyway? Who here has played the Star Spangled Banner? Trumpet, solo. And who here has dutifully taken their pants off? Who has come forward to testify? Who here has been involved in liberating a sign from its original place of municipal installation? Who here has touched the Stanford Axe? Who here has touched Oski the Bear? How about that taxidermied version that went missing in the late 80s but was somewhat returned to them in somewhat physically good shape? Who here has stayed to the very end of Dolly Night? Tree Night. Old farts, who here has stayed awake to the nightly news last night? Good job. Who here has hired the Stanford Band to play a special occasion? That happens a lot. Who here worked on band staff? Who here played as an alum? Part of the band coming in. Nice job. Who here's marched in a Rose Bowl parade with the Stanford Band? Who here's traveled to a foreign country with the Stanford Band? Nice work. Who here has been asked to lead the Stanford Band? And who here actually needed the units they got from the Stanford Band to graduate from Stanford University. All right, well, thank you very much for being warmed up. The first member of our panel has the distinct privilege of being a gentleman who was in both the pre-Stanford Band, the earlier Stanford Band, and the 1963 Strike Stanford Band, and has made his way to us today. If he would stand up and take a bow, please welcome Frank Robertson. So Frank, tell us a little bit about what was going on in 63 or thereabouts or leading up to 63 that would give birth to this crazy mayhem.
Well, first of all, I'm told that you're only given one chance to make a good first impression, so it's all downhill from here. What was it like? Well, the band in the old days wore a uniform something like this. This is a Stanford Band uniform, but it's a little hard to pin down how old it is because it's probably older than I am, but they wore similar uniforms for 3 or 4 editions of worn-out uniforms. So what was it like? The band had a style, which I'll demonstrate in a second. It was very important to their tradition in those days, and freshmen or other underclassmen were often reprimanded for not keeping up the tradition, which was constantly playing, constantly marching, never stopping, and high-stepping. And when I demonstrate this, you'll have to try to imagine what it's like when you're trying to play a brass instrument as loudly as you can.
That's insane. That looks insanely stupid. I mean, why would anyone do that? And how long did they do that? Like from the 30s to 62 or what?
I don't know for sure, but it was said to be the long-lasting tradition, and it's exhausting. Believe me, you can't get your breath ever during a show that might last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes. In those days, there was nothing going on in the stadium except the band, or occasional announcements of what the score is from Slippery Rock. So we could have as much time as we wanted. They didn't make us play 15 seconds of a song and then cut 3/4 of it and go on to the next song. So that's the way it was, folks.
As opposed to today's inane ribbon tweets.
Right. The directorship of the band. To my knowledge, the band has never had a full-time dedicated band director. It just doesn't work that way at Stanford. So our director at the time I joined was Julius Schuckett, who was the full-time band teacher at Palo Alto High School, and he did a part-time job at Stanford. I've heard a couple of sources that indicated he wasn't even paid. His key job was to conduct the national anthem before the game. That hasn't changed, and to conduct the alma mater after the game, and that has been true many, many times. In the summer, he would meet with the band staff, and they would look at the game schedule for the following year and determine which games they would play at and what the theme of the shows would be. And then the student leaders, I want to come back to that in a minute, but the student leaders would spend some time recruiting. They would write up instructions to the freshmen entering class so that they could come to campus and join the band. They would also distribute a band handbook, which was first done in 1960, a little before I got there.
This sounds really fun.
Oh, yeah.
Please tell me more.
And this thing's getting warm. Student management, this is kind of important because very much like today, the student management consisted of a band manager, an assistant who would take over the following year, a drum major who would run absolutely everything while on the field, the usual smattering of other support functions like a properties manager and a librarian and so forth. But there was a key role for the instrument section leaders because they were referred to as rank leaders. Imagine a parade formation marching down the street where the front row is all trombone players, and the most experienced trombone players would be the rank leader and would march on the right-hand side so that everyone else could march along and make sure they're in a pretty much straight line.
More fun.
Yeah, more fun. Most of these leaders, including the whole band staff, all of the rank leaders, and a few assorted additional Red Hots, would be typically invited to join Kappa Kappa Psi, which is a national honorary band fraternity. And so they were really the leadership group of the band. On the back of your program is a reproduction of a little piece of paper that was sent to all of the returning band members at the end of the 1962 school year in the summer. Pretty much, you can't really see that in here, but it pretty much says you're invited to come back and not continue in the band. This is loaded with sarcasm and irony because the Kappa Kappa Psi leadership had met with representatives of the music department to find out what was going to happen after the director had been fired. And they were told that, well, the band will run just like it has. It'll still have the band shack, although in the future we'll give you a dedicated rehearsal hall and a dedicated place to store your instruments, and the athletic department will still take care of the uniforms. And by the way, you'll have a new director, but he won't be here until the fall of 1963. So the band pretty much said, well, what happens to our summertime planning? And they decided, well, with all that uncertainty, we don't know what to plan for, so we won't. And when they came back to campus, the first rehearsal had about 20 people show up, mostly freshmen, who were looking for a band. So, John?
So that's the strike, as it's called, yes?
That was the band strike.
And people took instruments home, squirreled them away, took equipment?
People generally owned their own
Oh, it's Stanford.
instruments.
Never mind. I'm sorry. That's
Stanford band students in those days had to bring their own instrument and white shoes unless they played tuba or bass drum or one of the larger instruments where the band would provide it. And we also had a set of orchestra bells, the kind of things you tap on with a hammer. Some of those things were hiding in my parents' garage in Palo Alto when the band was on strike.
All right, so that's the strike.
That was a strike.
Frank Robertson, ladies and gentlemen.
And there was another band strike in 1939, but that's for a separate time.
So, well, gosh, moving down to our next panelist, who we all know and love, and we'll try to understand. Art, what an auspicious welcome for you. You show up and all the...
Well, once every 50 years, why not?
Yeah, right. You show up and the students are, basically they took all their stuff, they took their toys, they're staying home, and you have 20 frush. You must have felt very, very warm.
When I first came to Stanford, I finally got the idea that the reason why nobody showed up was that, and this may have been even before Frank's time, if you were in a band, you were probably one of the very loudest miscreants on the Stanford campus. If you were in the band, you could not be in a fraternity, let alone a sorority. That changed. Now, how do we get people to get into the band after the strike? Well, I spent a lot of time with Wally Sterling and Fred Glover in their office, and finally we had a couple of the more vocal band members. We could come together and say, well, we got to put a band on. Of course, we didn't have a band for the first game or for the second game. And finally, I decided, well, we'll take 2 people and we'll go into the dorms, and if we find out there's somebody who's got a clarinet or a saxophone, we're going to hijack them. So miscreants that they were, they did. Now, Theta Xi at that time, you could not be in Theta Xi and play in the band. Years later, Theta Xi was 2/3 band. Yeah, right.
This is like Game of Thrones.
So I came here because I wanted to be an orchestra conductor. So I wanted to get my degree. I was down in Fresno for 4 years, and I wanted a little more learning, so I either was going to go to USC or to Stanford. So Stanford was closer. So I spent several summers here, and we put in the requisite 6 quarters. I got my degree, and I did get an orchestra. I've had an orchestra across the Bay in Livermore now. This is my last year there. It's my 50th year in Livermore in the community orchestra. And it has been fun.
Hey, Art, here's a question I've always wanted to know the answer to.
I got the answer.
What's the P stand for?
Page, P-A-G-E.
Thank you. All right.
All right.
Check marks. All right, so let's move a little further ahead. So you get a band. One of the things I think you're most renowned for is your legendary arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner, and a couple of really critical performances and some very kind of historically interesting performances. Can you give us a little bit of that?
Well, the background of that was that when I was at Fresno, we played all our games at night. We even had lights on our hats. Everybody had to carry a battery pack, blah, 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 blah. So we're getting done. I said, let's do something different. Let's turn off all the lights, before game, everybody has to freeze, put a spotlight on the flag, and we'll play the national anthem. Well, this was Wednesday, and the game was Friday. Well, they're not going to memorize all that music because they're not going to be able to see it, so I'll just have the trumpet play half of it. Really? Born out of necessity. So
A very romantic answer to a practical problem.
So when it came time, then this is history. We had that Friday, November 22nd, 1963 date when JFK left us. And when we finally played and got on the field, it was the loudest silence I ever heard. After that rendition, no one wanted to break that silence. And the people that were writing up the game, they didn't talk about the game. Prescott Sullivan over there, I think it was Oakland Tribune. The whole business of what happened to the game, he didn't talk about the game. He talked about the band and the national anthem. Well, it just happened to work out that way. I didn't plan it, but I did have the car gassed up in case it didn't work out.
Well, and we do have a special guest, ladies and gentlemen, the very first, at least at Stanford, banner trumpet soloist, who actually played the banner here the one game before the post-JFK game that most people don't know.
That's right.
It did happen once before. JFK's assassination, a couple games got delayed and canceled, and then eventually this was the first one. But would Gary Wilson please stand up and take a bow? Gary, where are you? There he is.
Thank you, Gary. Let's talk afterwards. Now, there's going to be a question and answer period afterwards if we have time, but I want to make sure I get this in because it has to do with John and I. John, and this is in the late 80s, he graduated the class of 89. This is 88. We went to Australia. And to make a long story short, we took 60 players to go to Australia, and Bill Lane was the ambassador. We had a fabulous time. How do you get those 60 players? Well, for about a year ahead of that, the band was playing this gig, the band was playing that gig, and trying to get paid because some people who were going to go in the summer, they wouldn't go because they had to work. But some just needed a little bit of money to help them out so they can get on the airplane and go, and we had a fabulous time there. Now, first 20 people that showed up, you could not put a band together with that. But I kept telling John, I said, listen, there's no problem. By the time we get 60, the sections will all balance out, and it worked out that way. They all get balanced out. We could have used perhaps another tenor saxophone or so, but John was playing, so that sort of took care of that. But when he got 60 people, the band was wonderful. Every section was strong and full. John came up to me and said, Art, how did you know that was going to happen? And while I watched his face turn ashen white, I said, just luck. I didn't have a clue. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Art. Hey, Art, do you still drive the yellow banana?
Yeah, the banana. Yeah, I've had it now for 47 years. 66 Dodge, slant 6, Coronet, convertible, yellow. Some of you have been in it. Just don't tell my wife.
Okay. And meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, that was Arthur P. Barnes, director of Stanford Band. From 1963 to 1997.
Wait a minute. There's one more story that has to do with this.
No.
I charted over 300 charts, so 300 arrangements. Now, I used to have on my desk a turntable and a speaker, and they had records then, those round things, that are 10 inches. And so I put this on, and I put the arm onto the record. I don't want to do it in the key of E. So I start stacking quarters on the arm until it goes just slow enough that it's an E flat. Okay. That's how we did that.
Slideshow, courtesy of Robbie Byers, ladies and gentlemen. Robbie, you've seen Robbie for decades and decades and decades. He used to be the young, creepy guy taking pictures of dollies. Now he's the old, creepy guy taking pictures of dollies. But he has thousands and thousands of photographs, and he assures me, for those of you who are attending the band banquet tomorrow night, that these are all outtakes, that tomorrow night you will see an entirely different set of photographs during the immaculate slideshow. Next, the guy down. So we go through the 60s, we make our way through the 60s to the early 70s. Stanford winds up going to 2 Rose Bowls. Woo! Which brings us to my good friend, Dr. David Ruiz. Thank you so much, Mr. Manager, assistant manager in 1970-71, and manager in 71-72. Dave, you were in the band in the 70s. Is there anything you remember about being in the Stanford Band?
That's cold. Yes. I do have some independent recollection, and as I found out last night, there are things that I clearly have forgotten and should probably say.
So tell us about a Rose Bowl or so. So you went to 2, I believe, in your time.
Yes, the 71 Rose Bowl was really magical. We had no idea we would end up doing this, especially after the freshman year. But my sophomore year started with one of those 60-player groups. Actually, it was 57. Came to be known as the Immortal 57. We started in Arkansas. We did a road trip. It was a road trip. Everybody got there in whatever way that they could. Is that really you?
Oh. Stay with us, Dave.
Okay,
Focus.
I'm sorry. It was one of those moments. So in Arkansas, we showed up. Everybody got there whatever way they could. We had a blast, and we put together the halftime show. Somebody came up with the great idea that we should take our pants off, so we did. And it actually played pretty well on national TV. And then our drum major, Jordan Vance Laurie second, Dr. Laurie, now, was the drum major. And he stripped down and then put on some fins, goggles, and came out as sort of a scuba diver, and we did a surfing jam show, California theme. Went over great. That set the tone for the rest of the year. We ended up in the Rose Bowl. Ken Peterson was the manager. It was a fabulous trip. We actually liked the guys from the Ohio State Band and had a pizza party with them that was actually sponsored by the Zobels. Beige knickers, red knockers, you all remember? And during that evening, we had a blast, some of which I remember because the last thing I recall was the UCLA rugby team and pitchers of beer and going down very fast, and that was it. But the next morning was the parade. The game went well. The one little thing that we did that kind of beaked the Ohio State crowd was it is their fashion to turn their hats backwards after they have beaten the opponent. We did it at the pregame. And that did not go unnoticed.
Oops.
And then we had a fabulous party that night. I won't talk. Well, I have to tell you about the party in Arkansas.
Okay, let's
That's
move
on
on
the stage.
to.
All right. The 72 Rose Bowl was fabulous as well. From my standpoint as the manager, it was kind of a rough day. We got up way too early and made our way to the parade. The buses showed up late. The lunches weren't there. We were sure it was a conspiracy and that the Michigan band was behind it. And prior to that, we, of course, made them very, very angry at Poly Pavilion and what became known as the Bridge of Sighs, when one of our guys actually mooned the Michigan band while they had a reporter from the Detroit Press snapping pictures. And the very next morning at about 6 a.m., I was rousted out of bed by the president of the university, who wanted an explanation. I was speechless, and so I did the only thing that most people in this room would think of doing. I found myself a lawyer fast and got Hal Michelson out of bed. He went on to do a very elegant denial to the president, and at the later that day, while we were really feeling happy about plausible deniability, the said offender who mooned the Michigan band actually went over and publicly apologized to them, having his photo taken one more time. Not the great way to start the Rose Bowl. We finally got there. Along the way, we got word that our equipment truck had gotten in an accident on the freeway. And the guys actually talked their way out of a terrible ticket and got an escort to the Rose Bowl. We arrived late, and the rest was just so surreal. It happened quickly, but the pregame went very well. We got to do the banner that year, and it was my honor to actually perform it. The game was, but you know what I really remember about the banner is after having played, I just stood there and I listened to all of you finish it, and it was an incredible moment. Because that's one thing about us, we were tight musically. And that's one thing I love about the band. We can always rise to that occasion for that level of musicality. We won.
Nice. Really nice. Hey, Dave, we also nominated you, just of the panelists. Anybody could speak of it, but you spoke pretty eloquently about. For folks who aren't aware, the halftime shows and the pregame shows that the band comes up with are their own invention. They're called, they have a cute little name for it, do they not?
Yes, the Stanford Marching Unit Thinkers. SMUT. SMUT actually predates me, I don't know by how long, but again is something very characteristic of the band. Students ran it. The inmates ran the prison. We created this stuff, and it was done by such a wonderful group of people. I think that over the years, I was asked about the protests and the social commentary and our politics, and I would laugh because, you know, we had Birkenstock-wearing, bandana-toting guys over here on the left, and then we had ROTC students over here. We all checked it at the door, and the band was the safe haven, the shack. Mother Shack. I remember Mother Shack before we lost her. But it was the place where we could all come together with common goals, I guess if you could call it having goals, and just, and I think it was driven by sort of slightly restrained narcissism in the end. But it worked. It gave us tremendous halftime shows, except for those few formations that, again, I took calls from the athletic director and one from the university president. There was that Gym 1.6 thing, and then there was always and I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know that they would turn Jim Pluckett 16 into James McAllister and his grade point average by just putting a decimal point in there. I didn't intend to insult UCLA.
But it's usually clever, and it's kind of ripped from the headlines, usually, right? It's pretty timely.
It is, absolutely.
Tries to be.
Clever people, very creative people. It was always a special moment for me to see the show come together, and I didn't have to do much except provide a little beer.
Yeah, and air cover afterwards for all managers out there.
Yes.
It's little after you, and maybe we can go back and forth to Art too. So right in about 72 or so, the university decides to, the band decide to adopt a particular tune for touchdowns. Freeze all right now. Where'd that come from?
That came from
Jordy Lowry.
Lean in, Art.
Yeah, we'd been using "Come Join the Band" and it's still in the books. But Jordy decided. Is Jordy here to defend himself?
Yeah, he's over there.
All right. But he shoved it down the staff's throat. This is the only thing that the English rock band Free was known about. A one-hit wonder. And so I think, I'll arrange it. It sounds good. It's going to be good. So it just took off by storm. And then, of course, it evolved a little bit. Scott Stanford put on the Victory Mix. But everybody who's heard that knows exactly when to jump. And it started with a set of dollies. Are You Here? Can tell me that. You're it? You're it. Okay. So the dollies, this set of dollies did it, and then the band did it, and then everybody at the football game did it, and you all know when it is. That's that.
Thanks, Art. Well, that leads us right down. We're going to kind of skip over Dave a little bit here. We might come back to Dave in a moment. To Jacki Williams-Jones. Jacki was a band member in '72 and from 1974 to '77. She played Claire Pick in that period, but she also was the first ever Stanford band member to also be a dolly in.
We're not disclosing any details.
Now, Jacki, pardon me for stating the obvious, but if you look around, you are clearly a minority. And by that, I mean you're stunningly attractive. How exactly did you cope with hanging around with these mid-fist, ugly people?
Oh, it was very interesting. You imagine that you are an only child, you're 17, your parents came from a very conservative family full of preachers and teachers, and then I come here and say, I want to join the band. Because I had been at the 72 Rose Parade saying, I want to go there. 3 weeks before I showed up on campus, I got this pamphlet in the mail. It was funny. I even laughed at the smut room, the thing. And I said, well, I've got to try. So I come, and it was the first year they had women in the band. There were 8 of us that year.
Now, wait a minute. First year women in band. What was that about?
Title IX.
So wait a goddamn minute. So you guys didn't have the common sense to let women in the band?
Tradition.
No, I think it had more to do with the toner fluid from the mimeograph machines and alcohol myself.
I see. Got it.
Well, it was my understanding that this particular year, the September of '72, all Division I marching bands had to go co-ed.
Nice.
So I got this thing in the mail. My best friend from home had just joined the UCLA band, and I said, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So I get here, and it was amazing because there were many guys in the band who were determined not to let the female presence change anything.
Like?
I was told by Hal I was not supposed to tell those stories. But for example, when we were trying on, some guys didn't have the black pants on their own, so there was a whole rack, and these guys are going, well, we're not letting any girls just change anything, so they just dropped trout right there and tried them on, and it's like, this is like the ceiling is really interesting. There were many traditions after games that were, I really can't.
They're not not female friendly.
Sam Boot told me I couldn't tell you those stories.
Okay.
But so I was there, and many of us were. Where's Priscilla? I see you. Yeah, there she is, the first woman to get pantsed.
The first woman to get pantsed.
Yes, that was Priscilla.
How proud your parents must have been.
And so what I did get was a ton of big brothers. But I do have to say that, first of all, they put me in the tuba rank as a clarinetist because they didn't
Makes
have
perfect
enough.
sense.
Yes, perfect sense. They didn't have enough tubas to make a rank, and so if you remember, the tubas were at the back of every formation. And if the tubas had the right of way, well, of course, if you had a tuba, it was very obvious. And if you didn't have a tuba, you had to scream tuba, 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 tuba as you ran across the field.
I see.
And I did.
So
and then, of course,
the tuba
next
being the slipstreaming device by which
well,
you
I
would
think
run.
I sort of drafted off of Al Mila, who's back in the back. And then, of course, the next year when I was at Dolly, they got the right-of-way, too. So I figure I've just, if we played Milborn, I'd have the little permanent right-of-way card.
Nice. All right, so Dolly stuff. So stuff that
Dolly
people
stuff.
don't know about Dollies. Tell us about the outfits. Where do those come from? Where do you buy those?
You have them made.
You what?
You have them made.
You have them made. What do you mean?
Well, the Dollies that came before us gave us the name of their seamstress, and we went and we bought the material, which was wool, by the way, 100% wool, which was really interesting after a particularly wet evening in San Francisco when they just... We got in the car and it was like, whoa, what is that? And it's like, oh, what's that? Then, and since we were just at the end of the Indian era, we pretty much just copied our football uniforms, pretty much copied what had come before. And then, so the football uniforms were sort of traditional. And then as we got further and further away from the Indian, each group after that sort of changed, and somebody brilliantly thought, well, we'll get rid of the wool and we'll go to something a little more exciting. So they did that. And the basketball uniforms were usually white instead of red, white with red trim, and then we created those ourselves.
Cool, self-created, neat.
Yes.
So tell us, you have a really also very, very interesting perspective. Was it challenging to go from, being one of the most front and center signature pieces of the Stanford Band to going back to being one of the most least important and least heard?
Oh, but that was never me.
You got to dig at the clear picks. Come on.
Well, first of all, that was never me because, I just, thank you. I'll do that.
Well,
But what I did do was the fall after my Dolly year, I went overseas.
oh, so you escaped.
I did.
You escaped and then
I
came back.
escaped to Paris, but somehow I was dragged back.
You were drawn back.
I was drawn back, and it was fine because I still had a place. I still had all my big brothers, and they still spoiled me rotten.
Nice. Band of Brothers. Thank you, Jacki.
And I have to tell you that I watched the Arkansas game on television, and I still remember them dropping trowel.
Well, Jacki meant thank you, Jacki. So what? And again, we'll be here all night. We'll be here all week. Certainly, a lot of us will be here for most of the week, but we do have Q&A coming up. So if you've got questions, it's probably a good idea to start to kind of write those babies down. We're going to have some of the folks are going to kind of come up and down and start to collect those at some point. But you did mention something, which was this thing about the Indian and moving away from the Indian. If you're not aware, Stanford adopted the Indian, I think something in like the late 30s as a mascot, and it kind of kept it until the early 70s. And in its progressiveness, actually very progressive move for a university at the time, dropped the idea of a peoples as a mascot. And, and then kind of was left with kind of a void. The university had selected a variety of names. Some things had gone on. There was some vote amongst the students. And right in the front row, I'm going to ask Bob Tiffany to stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Tiffany. Bob played clarinet and tenor sax in the band from 73 to 76. And you know something about this whole tree movement. So what happened? What was going on here, and why tree?
First of all, I want to know, why am I not allowed up here? I mean, what the hell? No.
It's zoning.
So at any rate, so in '72, when the university reverted back to the Stanford Cardinal. There was no great consensus among the student body as what the name should be, but everyone agreed among the students that Cardinal was an incredibly lame and boring name, as it still is, by the way. If it was referring to a member of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, maybe it was something we could have worked with. But alas, it was a color. So there was quite a few years where there was a lot of discussion about what the mascot name should be, whether the university liked it or not. Initially, it was the Thunder Chickens, which was the nickname of the defensive line of the Rose Bowl teams in the early 70s. And then after a little bit of a hiatus, the mascot issue came to the forefront once again in 1975, the fall of 1975, which happened to be my senior year. It was determined that there was going to be a referendum, the student referendum, that was going to be conducted by the Stanford Daily. And there was a lot of discussion what would be the student voted mascot. Early contenders were the Sequoias, which a lofty name, but equally boring and a little pretentious in my mind. It referred, of course, back to El Palo Alto. That was the connection. Also, many favorites, many people's favorite was the robber barons.
Why robber barons, Bob?
Well, we have a shirt over here, by the way, robber barons. You see that? Well, of course, everyone knew the university wasn't going to go for that one, but because it referred back to, of course, our founder, Leland Stanford, who was one of the big five capitalists that came to California, and that was the affectionate name they were given. Big Four. I was a history major. I was not a so at any rate, naturally, the Stanford band thought that we had to weigh in on this issue, not to mention it was a great opportunity for a halftime show. So the vote was to be in the late fall of 1975. And we decided we're going to have a mascot show, the big game of 1975, November 22nd, 1975, many years ago, 38 years ago next month. It's hard to believe. At any rate, I happen to be the properties manager, which my responsibilities was primarily keeping the beer cold, but in addition to that, getting uniforms and the larger instruments down to the away games. And it just so happened there was an SC Stanford game in LA 2 weeks prior to the big game in 75. And so the night before the big game, which would have been November 10th, I was in a Ryder truck with my good buddy Eric Strandberg, who's in the front row here. Eric is, by the way, the famous author of many charts, including Everybody's Everything, My Old School, et cetera, et cetera. So at any rate, Eric and I, we were, hauling ass down Highway 5, passing the time late at night, and naturally we evolved to what should be the band mascot that we would unveil at the Stanford big game. Being the unimaginative people we just started throwing out ideas of objects that we were seeing as we were looking out the window.
Nice.
Yeah. Very
Roadkill.
clever. Very impressive.
Highway patrolman,
Yes,
hopefully.
right. At any rate, so we could have been the Stanford Bushes, Stanford Rocks. For some reason, Eric and I became very hungry at one point, I remember, and we were going by a McDonald's, and suddenly Stanford Order of Fries seemed to be a really good choice, and which soon became the Holy Order of Fries because we were big fans of Monty Python and the Holy Grail at the time. So that was one of our choices, the Holy Order of the Fries. So it could have been worse. Thankfully, for history's sake, we evolved back to looking at natural objects out the window, and suddenly trees came to mind. In those days, it was plural, it wasn't just tree. But trees, we suddenly realized that we'd come on to something. Was that a Freudian slip? At any rate.
This is why you're not on the stage, Bob.
At any rate, trees, the beauty of it was not only did it fill the requisite of being kind of inherently silly, kind of an anti-mascot, certainly no pretentiousness about it, but it also had the beautiful symmetry of tying into El Palo Alto and tying back into the university. So we knew we had something. So when we went to the SMUT meeting the following Monday, we were armed with our two first choices, the Holy Order of the Fries and the Stanford trees.
The Holy Order, that would be easy formation to make.
Exactly. Well, we, with the help of my other good friend, Tom Banducci here, future trial lawyer extraordinaire, he was very loud and bombastic even back then. And the three of us lobbied long and hard, and in a very close vote, trees won over the Holy Order of Fries. And third choice, another creative choice, was steaming manhole covers.
We have those.
Okay, so there we are. We picked the trees. The big game, we had 2 weeks to the big game, which was really a lot of time. So not only did we plan the mascot show, but we had time to create a spectacle. We among girlfriends and other friends, we identified a tree queen. We had wood nymphs. We carried the tree. We're going to carry the tree queen up on a platform.
Here they are, ladies and gentlemen.
There we are, and the wood nymphs. I'm on the right, escorting one of the wood nymphs. She wouldn't give me the time of day. I remember that. At any rate. And I thought we were sex symbols when we were in the band, but no. At any rate, so that was November 22nd, 1975. The funny thing is that we'd done all this planning, but we hadn't really thought much about a tree itself. And so I remember on Friday before the big game, the day before, we're running around looking for a tree that we would unveil. And somewhere in the backyard of someone's house today, there may still be a stump. I don't remember the details, but we put this lame Charlie Brownish tree on the back of a golf cart, wrapped it in sheets, and that was going to be our tree that we're going to unveil. Well, really unbeknownst to Eric and Tom and I, thankfully there were smarter people out there, which is not saying much, frankly, but a good friend of ours, Chris Hudson, and her roommates. Chris was a roommate of Tom's girlfriend, Lori, now wife, and also Jan Krause, who's is now married to Bruce Wolf, another bandsman. Anyway, Jan and Chris and Lori, they lived in a trailer. And Jan and Chris decided that they were going to put together a tree costume. And they spent until about 4:30 a.m. that morning, the morning of the big game, putting together this tree costume. And do we have a special appearance?
Ladies and gentlemen, making a special appearance in the second ever tree costume, because the first one got burned or thrown away or something, but wearing the second ever tree costume is Chris Hudson, the very first tree ever.
Chris, come on up. Come on down. She can't see you. Well, actually the first outfit that Chris did, which you saw. Beneath that, I understand, and this is just construction paper, is a hula hoop, let's see, it's a backpack for scuba gear. But at any rate, the very first tree was actually all in red, cardinal red, I suspect. And Chris danced during the big game, and a few times She can find her way. Thanks, Chris. Chris, anyway, dancing. So Chris danced to the big game and a few other times that year, and then she was a master's program the next year, and she danced throughout the following year. And initially, she was still in this red tree outfit. If you came in, you saw the picture of her in the red tree. Well, one of her family members said she looked like a dancing red chicken, I think. And I don't know where the chicken came from, but she decided to change it over to green, this is actually the second original version of the tree. And by the way, just as an aside, they did have the election in early December. Robert Barron's came in first. In a split tree vote, the sequoias came in second, closely followed by the trees. But the university ignored all that anyway. And with the tremendous influence of the Stanford Band, Chris's dancing, the rest is history. And that was 38 years ago today.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Mr. Tiffany. And then I think, unless anybody wants to challenge this one, I think the trees were all women until Paul Brendan Kelly in 1980, the third, thank you, in 1987, I believe, was the first male, followed by Bill Thomas in 88. And so it's mostly was women, and now it's kind of, it's multigendered. And also in another one of those traditions, just like the dollies, the trees make their own outfits. I think most people have heard that kind of thing. But it's kind of up to them to invent them, craft them, maintain them in most cases, because most of the time they're not made as sturdily as they could or should be to withstand weather that either comes here in Northern California or when the band travels. And honestly, most of the time when they're done, they are done. You do not want to get anywhere near that tree outfit at the end of a certain person's use of that tree. So that takes us up to about the 80s. And in somewhere in the early 80s, let's call it 1982, Stanford Band, in one of its, let's call it its most notorious moment ever, the band is on the field. The band is on the field. I beg your pardon? And he was down. Yes, thank you so much. But to help us with his very unique perspective on the play, which we will not recount here, it has been recounted in glorious detail by another band alum, Kelly Anderson, who works with Sports Illustrated, has written something called The Oral History of the Play. If you haven't checked it out, absolutely go Google it. It is fascinating. She did a really great job at interviewing probably 10, 15 different people with their different perspectives on the play, including John Elway, including Gary Terrell. Is she here? Hey, Kelly, are you here? Here you are. Kelly is the foremost authority on various perspectives on the play. So if you have any questions, please be sure to pigeonhole her at some point, or just pigeonhole her at all. Meanwhile, we also have the band manager from 1982, John Howard, sitting right here in the front row. Ladies and gentlemen, John Howard.
Thank you.
So John, could you share with us, from your unique perspective of being band manager, something that we haven't yet heard about the play, or that your perspective enlightens us somehow?
Well, I've been in therapy for years now. And my doctor advised against talking today.
John Howard, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That's okay, Bob took all your time.
In that case, really fast. Who was at the play? On the field? Okay, or as opposed to in the stands? Yes, the proud, the few. It was a tumultuous day. It was a blue day. The sky was high. I'll tell you 3 things you may or may not know about the play. The first one is, what was the perspective from the field? About 50 of us in here probably have that perspective. Well, the field's crowded. It's hard to see.
It's crowned.
Like
crowded.
It's higher. It was crowded at one point. There was
Right.
a lot of us there.
Right.
Now, But yeah, and it was hard to see, and we're all standing there, and Elway had decided not to run down his clock. There was 4 seconds left. It was the big kick return. It was a big time, and we're all standing there watching from the ground, right along the edge of the end zone. We're all kind of crowded around it, getting ready to play. We're waiting for it, and the clock clicks down. We're seeing these teams going, and all of a sudden, and there goes the Stanford bench onto the field. Goes to 0-0, right? There goes the Cal band onto the field. There goes the Cal
The Cal
bench.
band was on the field?
Oh, yes.
You're kidding me.
Oh, yes.
I've never seen that.
No, and that comes to one of the great wishes that Steve Jobs had invented these earlier. Yeah. Because then there would have been 100 different angles.
Right.
We only see one, don't we?
Right.
And that was following the ball. In any event, we half of us go on the field, right? Except for Gary, who dutifully turned his back and watched disco and tried to play music until a few minutes later. And we all started running on, and then all of a sudden my first single was the Stanford band is running on the field, but the football team's running off the field, and the Cal team's running, and then all of a sudden they were through us. So the first thing is, it was really chaotic, really exciting.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. And so it was tough to grapple with that. We all got back in. We started playing. It was an emotional time. I went to try and find Andy Geiger so he could hit me. So that was the first thing. The second thing is Gary Robinson. Is he here? Okay. He's probably making money, unlike the rest of us. Gary was the incoming assistant manager, the ass man. I was the manager. That's how they used to do it. You'd learn how to be this bad for a year, and then you'd get to be that bad for a year. And the transition always came at big game, but we never really defined when. Which led us to the moment of, well, are you the manager or am I? We have since codified this, and at 4 seconds at big game, or now it's kind of weird, the last game, band manager changes position. It's now officially the ass man's fault. So that was number 2 of things. The third one is, why the hell were we on the field? Why were we down there? We don't normally go down there. At the Cal games, we used to stay in the stands right underneath the students. We were there for a reason. We were there because the ushers had given away our seats. We'd arrived probably a half hour late. I'll tell you why in a minute. And the seats were gone. And the ushers are going, oh, I don't know, sit over there. We were sitting underneath the Cal alumni section in the end zone about, over on the other, we were looking at the student section. That's a bad place to be. If you saw that's my daughter there, class of 12, very nice lady. Yeah. And that's me going, what did I do wrong? And so we were sitting there, and we're going, okay, we're going to stay. Ray and I are talking. We're going we can't be here when this thing plays out. We're in the wrong place. They used to throw frozen oranges at us. That was the year we started buying hard hats and wearing them on the field, which the Cal sheriffs actually said was an incitement. And we're going no, I don't think that is. We'll send you the dental work. So we said we're going to move down underneath. So that's why we were moving out. We were trying to get underneath our team, be underneath the red when this thing all boiled down. And we were pretty sure we were pretty close to winning at that point. So it was pretty exciting. Though actually, when we were coming down, it takes about 2 minutes to move the band anywhere. And if you ever tried to get the band anyplace, it takes about 5 hours to get the band anyplace. But so why were we late? Well, it turns out we were doing an album that year, starting salary, whatever. And we were shooting an album cover a couple of weeks before. And Robbie had bought or had rented from a camera store a full format Hasselblad 2x2 gorgeous camera. We'd all been in uniform. We all said, okay, we're going to go get this picture. The Mozart one, everybody calls it the Mosquito. We're all parked in front of that. We're going to get this picture taken. It's going to be awesome. We take the picture. We all get on to our game. It's the last home game before a big game. It's a big deal. Robbie calls me a week later and goes, John, problem with the camera, and I don't have a shot. They loaded the film backwards. And I'm going, backwards? And he goes, backwards. I didn't know you could do that, but you can. So we didn't have a shot for this, and we're going, okay, what's the last time we're there? All right, the last time we're all going to be in uniform is big game. We'll get them a little earlier, which is very easy for the band. I just said it took 5 hours to get them anywhere. Come a little early. You know.
Because we love that.
Yeah, they do well with direction. So we get everybody down on the field, and we're all going. We go up to Mozart 1. The buses are waiting for us. That's why we're late. But here's the really fun thing. He rented the camera from Keeble and Schuckett. Schuckett is Jules Schuckett's son. And so really, you could say that this picture was the start of making Jules Schuckett's last field show. And in fact, that's why we were on the field, was making this picture, which I'm giving to the band today. But in any event, it was a tumultuous time. That's
The
one.
very same family that kicked off this whole thing
Yes.
are
yes,
responsible for the play.
That's right. If we'd been a little bit nicer to that family, maybe showed them a little courtesy. Anyway, so that's some trivia that doesn't get out much. So that was the play. Afterwards, it was a big deal.
Yeah, lots. So what happened after that?
Well, let me see. I would wake up in the morning to hearing Gary on the radio being interviewed. That was Gary Robinson. Gary Terrell was not quite famous yet, but he was pretty sure he was infamous. So he was hiding a little. I think I saw him here. Here.
Oh,
there
he's
he is.
here.
Take.
Gary Terrell, trombone guy.
And Gary was my roommate at one point. Okay. And then
Something you'd like to tell us?
Yeah. And I actually went home that weekend and walked into an auto parts store and was actually throttled by one of the clerks. So it was a really tough time for us. We were trying to figure out what happened. And there's Ray. Hey, Ray. But it gets funnier in the retelling. It does speak to something I think Kennedy said, that it's a unique event. It's something that just happens, and you just have to sort of roll with it. It's a thousand things going right or wrong, and in my perspective, it's probably destroyed my life.
John Howard, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, John. Okay, well, that leads us to the late 80s period, and I'm going to actually handle this one myself, because I was there running a bunch of stuff. And what I'm kind of characterizing the late 80s, I'm going to call it kind of the international traveling LSJUMB. Who would have thought in '63 that we would go to places as exotic as San Diego, or Los Angeles a number of times, or Tokyo, Japan, or Jacksonville, Florida, or Colorado, or Missoula, Montana, or Shreveport, Louisiana, or South Bend, Indiana, or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Canberra, Sydney, Surfers Paradise, and Brisbane, Australia. It was an incredibly traveled time. It was one of those deals, if you were like me and my friends, writing home to your families and telling them, no, I can't come home for Thanksgiving, I'm going to Tokyo. It was really quite a trip. It was all of the incredible things that started to pile onto us associated with travel. And the Tokyo trip, I'll share one of my absolute favorite stories. We were pretty much that entire Coca-Cola bowl. Actually, here it is. I maintained. I see a variety of you have this one. This is the out of the gutter and into the gator. This was our bowling shirt from 1986, where we went to both the Coca-Cola Bowl and the Jacksonville, which one was that? The Gator Bowl, and played Clemson. Fun little fun fact, poor tree. The souvenir cups had the Clemson tiger paw, which you all know, the orange tiger paw, and on the other side it had an angry bird for the Stanford Cardinals. Missed opportunity. Here's a nice windbreaker they gave us in Tokyo. Celebrating the Leland, Leyland, Stanford Junior University Marching Band. Fun apparel everywhere we went. But meanwhile, Tokyo, fun story, they really didn't know what to do with us. This was way back before ESPN took over college football. And the Coca-Cola Bowl starred ourselves in the University of Arizona. And they put together, there was no smutting. They put together the show for us and told us what to do. And it was the University of Arizona on one side of the 50-yard line and us on the other side of the 50-yard line. And we would spell out some of their big sponsors as formations. You know, we all had to kind of learn these things. It was a long weekend, whatever. Well, we waited and waited. This is the best hurry up and wait moment, right? You know, you would wait and wait and wait. We did the formations, 3-4 times. And we had to wait for 3 hours for Mr. Miyagi to come and approve the show. Somebody had to come and watch it and approve it, and this is the Friday night before the show. And we waited and waited and waited. And then, so we ran through the whole thing, and we would spell out, some of these things. So on one side of the 50-yard line, Arizona side, we would say Coca, a nice script. And then our side of the 50-yard line said, And then we would go to the next formation, and then Nippon Telephone and Telegraph was another big sponsor, so there was a very crisp N, and then kind of a T for NTT, and this went on for a while. So we made maybe 8 or 9 of these formations, and then it all ends, and so we stand there waiting, and finally, after this long, long, long pause, a sound comes over the microphone and says, Arizona band, you're looking good, but we need to stay here. You got to work on your transitions from Coca-Cola to NTT. The trombones, you need to work your transitions and keep to Frank's point, keep it at a certain level as you make your way from this place. The drums, you got to get from X to Y to Z in time and whatnot. And then there's this long, long, long pause. Stanford band, you're free to go. And boy, did we have fun with that one. You can imagine we had fun making fun of those guys for that one. So that was kind of our hurry up and wait trip. The other one, as Art mentioned, was World Expo 88. We were invited to represent the state of California at World Expo 88. Who runs these things? Idiots. So meanwhile, we raised a whole bunch of money, as Art says. One of the guys we went to go see was Mel Lane, whose family had run Sunset Magazine, Sunset Publishing, here in Menlo Park. And Mel Lane was magnanimous and generous and gave us a bunch of money, and also invited us to go see his brother, Bill Lane, who was U.S. ambassador to Australia at the time. Also Stanford alum, and unbelievable Stanford Board of Trustee member, as a matter of fact. So as part of that trip, one of the first stops we made was at Ambassador Lane's home in Canberra. We performed in his front yard, and he, of course, had all of his little friends come by. Now, his neighborhood would represent, or remind you of Epcot Center. So he lived in this very colonial-looking American house, and then across the street was a pagoda-looking house. And then down the street was, every home represented that country. So they all came out and had a really good time and enjoyed our rally. Well, Bill enjoyed our presence so much that he literally cleared his calendar for the next 2.5 weeks and traveled with us, which was not planned in any way, including his Secret Service contingent, who never got used to us. Early on in the trip, I left Art and Helene Barnes behind at one of our very first stops to make a point that we weren't messing around, and I'm not waiting for anybody. I said 10:30, I mean 10:30. We opened a SeaWorld attraction in Sydney and wound up on the equivalent of the Today Show, Good Morning America, all rolled in together, and we wound up on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. None of us really appreciated that Australia is the landmass of most of North America, but has the population of the state of California. So from that moment on, we were then rock stars everywhere we went. We practically couldn't buy beer because everywhere we went, people would put beer in front of us. So we became kind of like this Where's Waldo, or this kind of Blue Angels kind of, I think they're going that way, I think they're going this way. Where are you performing next? So we would go, we performed in the red light district. Art convinced me, another one of my very wrong moments when I told him, I don't think that's gonna work. He said, we have to arrange and we have to learn how to play Tie Me Kangaroo Down and Waltzing Matilda, which I thought were absolutely ridiculous, and they do sound ridiculous, but they were very popular. Very, very smooth move. And one of the most memorable moments was at a Sydney Aussie Rules football game. They asked us to come and perform and to do a little halftime show. They'd never seen, they don't have marching bands in Australia, at least in the late 80s. And they'd never seen it, they never mind an irreverent one, they never saw even a traditional one. So, of course, on the bus, we smutted what we could do. I contend there were 69 members, because it's funnier. 69 of us were in Australia, and we kind of came up with what could we do. And we borrowed from a variety of different shows that we'd done here, and created a couple dumb ideas. One of them was games throughout the ages. And so one of the formations, for instance, was a bowling alley. So that was just 2 lines. We didn't have to practice that. And then you'd put 10 people down the other end of it. And then you had 2 people at the other side, and they would kind of grab each other's ankles and then roll all the way down, and then knock the pins down. And that went on for like 5 or 6 songs. And then we wrapped it up with a uproarious game of, and we asked them for this specifically, could we have a folding chair? And we played a game of musical chair, where we put 1 chair in the middle of the entire circle, marched around it for a couple of songs, and as soon as we'd stop, would go dogpile the chair. Not our most professional performance, but we thought, it's Australia, they're fine. Well, we got off the field, and here we were in a similar situation as John. We're trying to get the band into the stands now. Again, getting congratulated by the fans. And the guy who runs the whole thing, I can see him coming right at me. I mean, I'm like, no, let's pretend I don't see you. So I'm trying to usher everybody back up there, and I'm fearing the worst. This guy slaps me on the shoulder, spins me around, and screams in my face, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" So we're charming everywhere we go. I would also then like to highlight that, at least from my perspective then, part of my perspective is that the 7 or so minutes that the band performs during football games is minuscule in terms of the actual band experience that most people have, and certainly the performing time that the band does, especially today. And I think we'll open this up a little bit coming up soon too. But when you add in there now men's basketball, women's basketball, the band is an occasional fixture in volleyball. We tried, in my tenure, we went to a tennis match once. They didn't like us there at all. There was a lot of shh. Like everything we did pissed them off. Shh. God, all right, so, but rugby expects the band every once in a while. It was in my tenure, too, that Tara Vanderveer showed up on campus. And now suddenly we had a successful women's basketball program, occasionally with a men's basketball program, which creates a real challenge at spring band, Red Vest Band, which usually only has about 35, 50 members. Now you got to have 2 bands traveling around the country. So that's been a new idea, too. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff the band does, like the Los Gatos Children's Christmas Parade we used to do in my tenure. We used to go to the Bing School and bring instruments to the preschool and kind of introduce kids to instruments, that kind of thing. I just saw that the Stanford Band 2 weekends ago was at the Belmont Save the Music Festival on a Sunday afternoon. They go to UC Davis Picnic Day, which is another biggie all the time. The Queen visited Stanford and the band was there. There are weddings, there's all-campus rallies. And in at least my time, one of the most active parts of the staff meetings on Monday nights were trying to figure out how many of these things could we do. We would get requests to probably perform maybe 10 times a week. So as a student in university, it's kind of tough to figure that out. And so we used to have to kind of commit to one another, are these the things that we could do? So you hear an awful lot about, and we get an awful lot of press about the play or about the things that happen, in the stadium. But in truth, the Stanford Band performing repertoire is way, way, way wider than that. And I'd just like to ask you guys, does that hold with your experience? Is that new, or has that evolved differently?
Well, I know that we had rallies all the time.
Yeah.
And so, for example, as a dolly, we practiced 5 days a week, plus band rehearsal. Then we'd have rallies in the city, anywhere, upstairs, downstairs. Downstairs, sorry. We had a rally, a pregame rally when I was dolly. We played Penn State, and the 2 coaching, the coaches were having dinner sponsored by Sports Illustrated, and we got to have dinner with them. Somehow the manager agreed to let us stay, And we had dinner with them, and it was very nice.
Yeah, it's been wild.
Yeah.
Dave, you want to say something? No. Okay. So that then takes us to Patrick Neschleba. Patrick Neschleba has been in the band a good long time. He does a lot of duties on the alumni board, but he was also a drum major and a variety of other things. So Patrick, the gay 90s. Tell us about the gay 90s.
Gay goes to yay. Yeah, sorry, a few of you were there. Let me take this off. It's annoying. The gay 90s. So it's funny. So you've heard a lot of stories here about like traditions that all started in like the tree and All Right Now and stuff and that all these people gave us. So you come to the band in the 1990s and you're just hit with this wall of tradition of like, oh, you got to do this here and you got to do here and you got to jump here and you're going to do this here and then you got to drink this and like all this other kind of stuff, which is really fun to enjoy and imbibe. And so you get there and you're like, well, how the heck am I going to add to this? Because they all did cool new stuff. So what the heck are we going to do? And I kind of summarize the 90s along two things, like music and just the mayhem that happened. Musically, as already been brought up, Scott Stanford had the bright idea of writing out and arranging Paul Rogers' entire masterpiece, and that produced All Right Now Victory Mix, which is now played after every Stanford sports victory that the band is attending. There's another story about music that started in my freshman dorm. Now, a lot of you probably don't know this. My freshman dorm, there's a group of guys that would do push-ups every night, to stay in shape and get pumped up. And we'd always put this John Williams music on in order to get really psyched up for, doing our push-ups. We had these hand motions, kind of thing that we'd do. And one of the guys said, Patrick, he was actually an accordion player. He said, Patrick, the band should play this song. And I'm like, it's not a rock tune. Like, what the heck? Like, what is he thinking? So fast forward like a year and a half later, I'm sitting there at Pauley Pavilion watching the Cal Band do this big entrance thing, and I was like, this sucks. Like, we don't have anything that goes like this, or we can have like an entrance type thing that the band can play for something. And I remembered those push-ups. I said, how about the throne room fanfare from Star Wars? Classic. So we wrote it, the band somehow liked it, and Marshall Unger, the band manager, had the bright idea to play it when the teams took the court, or when the football team walked to the stadium. And if you had told me when I was doing those push-ups in that dorm room freshman year that 20 years later the band would be playing that song, I would not have believed you. But that's what this organization does with tradition. It never gives up, and once stuff sticks, it just keeps going and going and going. And so we had to kind of raise the bar on stuff. And a lot of new music got written in the 1990s because, you guys know the band likes to arrange a lot of popular music. In the 1980s,
not a good time. Not a good time.
It was not a pretty productive time for
Take
music.
On Me by the Stanford Band. No, thank you.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, there are a couple things here and there, but that Scott Stanford arranged, but that was about it. So the 90s hit, and music got good again. And we started writing stuff. And people don't realize that listen to the Mirth Control album from the mid-90s. There were 17 new songs on there. There were 15 others that were just as good that we were very sad that we couldn't record because there was just so much good stuff coming out and students that were passionate about writing music. So that was kind of the way we made a mark in the 90s. The other part was the mayhem, though. And so you hear these guys talking about dropping trout, the games and stuff, and so you're like, okay, what am I going to do to outdo that? And so you get things like, the band goes and rallies the exotic erotic, and you have to answer questions like, how naked is the drum major going to get? And the drum major got pretty naked. You go to the Westwood Holiday Inn, and they've left open one floor for renovation, and you think, oh, this is a good opportunity. And, you decide, the football team is playing in Northwestern. Let's drive nonstop and try to keep all the cars on the road. They didn't, right? Or, we're playing East Carolina, right, in the Liberty Bowl. So what can we do to make fun of East Carolina? Well, they're kind of like America's forgotten state. So we'll do a whole show about that. And you think we'll have our moment of fun, and then people forget about it, and we'll move on. And then you pick up the paper the next morning, halftime flag, missing 51st star. And you realize you actually connected with people, and you've got another story to tell 15 years later at an event like this. So, that's what the 90s were about. It's just raising the bar, and more music, more craziness. How can you outdo the stuff? Because that thing you were thinking about doing, well, it's been done 10 years ago, so you got to think of something new to do.
So all this counterculture is totally done already.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, you got to break into something new. Hey,
Yeah.
Tanisha Perry. Tanisha, ladies and gentlemen, is drum major in 2000 in the Rose Bowls 2000. So just give us a little something. What about this? Is all of this sound like, is this familiar to you? Does this sound like a whole bunch of old farts just farting along or whatever?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. Good job. And so tell me now, enough, unfortunately, of our own members have graduated to go on to be lawyers and insurance brokers and whatnot, so that there's a lot of regulations now. There's a lot, the new freewheeling, crazy 50-year-old Stanford band has a lot of regs under it. Is it still seem fun? Is it just a matter of perspective? Does this sound like it was more fun, or are you having more fun?
Wow, loaded question there. I'd say it's always fun in a different sort of light. I think I was thinking about this as you guys were talking, and the stories that I could tell, a lot of other people could tell. I realized one big difference is the internet. And all of your sins are recorded on phones, and they are posted, and they are downloaded, and they become viral. And I think that both with the fun things that can happen and the things you guys did, I can just imagine if Steve Jobs had that phone invented just a little bit sooner, how much of the band there would not be.
Right. There'd be no use for this event. We just have a big website.
But I think along those lines, I do think that's sort of tempered a bit about the regulations that come up. People are more aware of what happens, has happened. But I do think the fun is there. I don't think it's the same way. There's more concern about alcohol, perhaps. Those stories that can't be told. There's always concern about those. But I think it's just more of, I don't really know how to... It's kind of a hard question. I think the fun is there. I think the fun is different for what you have seen and what you haven't seen. For instance, I got to hear stories about kegger nooners, I guess. That's not happening.
No.
That's not happening anymore.
No.
It's not even an issue. So the stadium is dry, but it's more
for everybody. For
Yes.
everybody, by the way, and that's for a lot of these people, that's
If you
news.
did not know, yes, the stadium is dry for everybody, but it is more enforced now. Searches do happen. The screening of the field shows. So turns out you can only get things by the sensors so many times. We were talking the other day, curses rim jobbed again. Got on the field. And now I think there's 3 weeks before shows are allowed to be performed.
That cannon formation with the dollies running out the end.
There's that.
Right.
Repeatedly, champagne bottles with dollies running out the ends.
Right.
Guns where the handle starts to round itself out. Those
Understood.
Sorts of things. Yeah. So, but there's, but it's weird to say because it's fun. I love it. I'm still here. I was in band, as you said, for the Rose Bowl. I am still more or less around, bringing two little people to come along in my footsteps, I suppose. But it's wonderful to hear how it all ties together.
Well, good. It's good. You sure look fun. It looks like a lot of fun. You look huge. The band looks huge now, and you'll see it. Oh, no.
Wow. You don't look so small yourself.
I'm so charming. At least I'm not, well, never mind. Ruddy, heavy set will never be said about you, Tanisha. Tanisha Perry, ladies and gentlemen. And now, a final couple of words. If we can get the microphone over here to this lovely Italian gentleman. If you have not yet met Giancarlo Aquilante. Hi. Giancarlo took over directorship of the Stanford Band when Art retired in '97 and has been doing this job now, 16-ish years?
No, actually, there was a gap.
Close.
There was a gap about 5 years. So, Art, did you retire when? In '97?
Yes.
97. So I started in 2002. So there were a gap of 5 years, and Scott Stanford did most of it. And even though the university approached me right after Art retired, and if I wanted to get these jobs. So I went to visit. I had no idea what the Stanford Band was. I don't look Italian, but I am. I really am. And so I had no idea what the band was. I came to Stanford. Professor Barnum always says he came to Stanford to be a conductor. I like to say I came to Stanford to be a composer. So one day the university approached me and said, you need to go see the Stanford Marching Band. You might take over that. So I went to one of their rehearsals. It was still in the old shack. So, shack 2, whatever, or 3 or 4. It didn't make any difference to me. I entered this place, and there was, I don't know how to describe it. But what impressed me the most, there were buckets of liquid, not identified liquid. It could have been anything. It could have been anything. So I went home and I said, there's no way. No way that I'm going to get this job. So the university attacked me on several occasions until 2002. I kind of had to give up. So that's when I took this job. And I say, when I entered, I need to, do I have a couple of minutes or it's late?
You have 1 minute.
1 minute. So not much is known about me because I'm a guy that I'm not shy at all, but I tend to live in the background, and it's indicative that the students, they just published a booklet about the band right now. They always every year, and so that's how they start describing me. Not much is known about our music director. That's how they started. So they think I'm kind of this weird Italian guy that shows up occasionally. And that's how they saw me at the beginning. So the band has been without a music director for a few years. So I show up and the band doesn't understand why now we've been without a director, or at least an official music director for so many years. Why do I need one now? So they thought I was some kind of spy, some university. They put a spy there to make sure that they do this and they do that. And then, plus there is another details. I was there to teach them something about music. And yeah, yep. And that was the time where the music department had nothing to do with the band. So the music department say, we're so fed up with that. We don't want to do anything to do. We're going to raise them from one of our ensemble in the music department. That's it. And that's when the band got transferred to the athletic. So this is the contest that I'm starting, right? And so I'm at to teach them something about music. So it was a long process before I could actually get something accomplished, starting to reconnect the band with the music department slowly, and to convince the music department. And this is something that needs to be done very slowly, one day at a time. So I had to tell them, look, the band, after all, is a legitimate musical group, okay? So you had to. I need another minute, I'm sorry. Because there is something important to say here. All these dumbness that you heard over here, all these things. So there is one thing, the band gets together because they like to drink. The band gets together because they like to travel. The band gets together because they whatever. But if you take all these components out and say, oh, the band is going to end, that's not true. The band is going to still survive. There's only one thing. So if you take out one thing, then the band will not survive. And that is actually music. If you take the music part out of it, that's the end of the band. The band gets together because they play instruments. That's it. The band gets together because they play music. If you take that component out, the rest is secondary, if anything. So I had to reconnect the band to the music department. That took me years to convince, for example, our music teachers, the trombone teachers, the flute teachers, the trumpet teachers, that some of the bands, they need some instruction. So can I send? Desperately. So I had to convince our trombone teachers that after all, they could actually teach people in the band. And let me tell you, that took a little bit of work. Same for the trumpet, same for the mellophones or the French horns or whatever they are. And, you know, whatever they are. Then also the red vest, it was once upon a time it was a music class. You might remember that. It was called 161C. So that disappeared for a few years, for probably a decade or so. Then I had to convince the music department that actually it is a legitimate class. And the music department said, do you think they meet the standard of our ensemble here in the department? And I said, of course they do. So I had to get that started again. Now we do the Red Vest. It's a music class. It's going back to it's called Music 161C. And in parentheses, we have Red Vest. And it's done in the winter, and it's done in the spring as well. So we do it twice a quarter. So here it is. I am these kind of unknown guys, people that don't know about it, but the students think I'm kind of shy. I don't say much. I go to their staff meeting. I never say a word, never say anything. But occasionally I say something. And when I do say, I have to say, given that, they actually shut up and they listen. It's amazing. It's amazing what they can do. So,
Giancarlo Acquilante, ladies and gentlemen.
One more thing. When I came to Stanford, Professor Bond was the one that gave me the exam, the diagnostic exam as a graduate student. It was Professor Bond, and I was one of his TAs for many years, and I'm honored to take after his footsteps.
So, do you like this program? So there are so many people who played a role in putting this together, but first and foremost, Hal Mickelson. We couldn't have done this without you. And I'd like to thank John and all of the folks who spoke today. This was a terrific, terrific afternoon. Now there's time for a commercial. If you like this program and you would like to see more like it, well, not exactly like it, but if you'd like to see more programs, please consider joining the Stanford Historical Society. You can go to the website, which is very easy to remember. It's histsoc.stanford.edu. We would love to have as many new members as we can get from all of this, which will help assure more programs in the future. In the interest of full disclosure, I have to say, when I agreed to be co-chair of the program committee, nobody ever told me that I would have to be part of a program like this. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, distinguished guest hosts. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, the truly incomparable Leland Stanford Jr. University Marching Band.